Hey there, guys. It's Aileen, and I am coming out, even though I'm not completely sure what I'm going to be doing and talking about, or how long I will last for, and all that. It's just that considering what I've been doing and how I have been, what I've been after in the past couple of weeks. I think I'm actually less tired and less flatlining, up here than I would have done, 2, 3 years ago. It seems like every time I go into the whole narcissism field of intelligence, I get knocked on the head a few times, and it comes from different angles, and it's very confusing, and I need a lot of time to process that stuff. Some of which is actually rather simple. But it means that things are finally getting an explanation. Things that I grew up with in the case of my parents, things that I encounter and still sometimes encounter in my own life, in myself also. And that's really the interesting bit, where I think I am potentially, capable of sketching lines of things of behavior. Also, if you look at my previous videos, there have been instances of things where it just sort of all adds up, and that's kind of neat. So the reason I'm also kind of knackered and at the moment, like, I don't know, there is also a fly whizzing around here, so I may have to pause at one point and hit it over the head in a definitive manner, which you won't have to witness, I hope. The other thing is that I have been rereading, and if you've ever done any creative writing, you will know how exhausting rereading is. It is like worse than writing the whole thing all put together ever was. I've got about, I don't know how much it is, 120 or so pages, fairly large font, lots of illustrations. I mean, I made it sort of pleasant for myself to work on also by incorporating all sorts of images and nature stuff and painting stuff and all that kind of interesting, things that I have enjoyed and so on. So as to pave the way for myself, apparently, to come to a rather new, different, kind of perspective for myself. And I suppose what I have to get used to is the idea that we are the people that are my ancestors. Let's just put them all in one basket here, and myself, where we used to think, or where I grew up with some kind of an idea that we were all very different people, very isolated from each other, very scared of each other, very, in a constant state of apprehension what the other people were going to think of next, that kind of thing. For me, all that has manifested also because I moved house many times as I grew up, and those are thoughts that I just keep having. And the fact, what I'm struck with now, what I'm trying to do here with my sentence, is that I'm actually discovering sort of the common language that each of our little programs were written in. I think that's basically it right there. And there's a couple of approaches to the language, to how you can look at those things. I got the fly. So the fly, at least one fly is gone. The languages that we were written in, the program, that you are a user of in your own life, that you somehow take for granted, in many ways. How much I have always taken for granted. And a lot of it had to do, in my own case, with being different, which is an easy trap to fall into if you move house every couple of years as you grow up. The first 25 years of my life, I mean, basically all my life, as I grew older, as I became an adult, so after 20, I would say, the periods that I spent in one house or in one living surroundings, one area, grew longer. But there was still a huge level of change. And because as a kid, I'd known so much change, a lot of which I had never realized that it was uncomfortable for me. Which sounds like a great big whine now that I listen to myself talk about this. But it sounds very... there's a part of my program that immediately rises up and goes like, you're being very bourgeois here. What with always wanting to be, having a past life as a gypsy or a traveler person, and here you are complaining about moving house too much. It's all true at the same time. That's what I'm coming to, I think, most of all for myself. And rereading what I have been writing. I have been writing since somewhere April, just, at the same time that the whole pandemic thing started to gather a head of steam there. I have sort of, to my great pleasure and happiness, been able to start on fresh material, writing about all sorts of different subjects that I am connected to for one reason or another, such as astrology, herbal, medicinal, essential oils, and memories of my past, my memoirs, whatever it's like witchy memoirs, if you like, what it's becoming. With a ton of illustrations, I've been able to come up with new material fairly, consistently, and also I think of a fairly consistent level of focus and attention in that. I've also managed to, that's a new thing for me. I've never been able to write anything of this prose, personal prose that says something about me, basically, or how I look at my life. I've never been able to do that up until 2020. So for me, that's like massive and exciting, and I'm really pleased that I got this opportunity, that I got around to doing it, that I actually took the time and went ahead and came back to my computer again and again, like sometimes a couple times a week, and sometimes I'd skip a week or two, and then I'd come back to it again. And coming back to the same project all the time. So that's really, I'm not making all sorts of different little subjects, although the subject matter is very, varied, and it's all over the place really, which is, it turns out that now that I have reread almost everything, the things that I needed to reread at this point, which like I suppose 75% or so of the whole thing, I have come to a couple of really new conclusions for me as to what works as written text for me. And that's like, I'm finding this out as I do it, which is very cool and actually rather entertaining also, except that there are rather darker themes that come up all the time as well. And they have to do with narcissism, with being a descendant of traumatized people, basically. And I'm not the only one out there, so that's why, as I always say, that's why I make this content, because I feel like there's a point to all that. There's a point to all the difficulties and all the darkness and all that. And we just have to figure that out, mostly, for ourselves, but we also have to figure it out together. So if anything I do here or say here contributes to your, coming to new ideas or approaches, or confirming for yourself how you feel about certain things, it's all good. It's all part of the whole, everything that we call life, I suppose. So one of the how it works is why it's also tiring and kind of a pressure, sometimes, and a bit more of a pressure and a drag than I necessarily like it to be. What with all the, I tend to not. I have two modes of writing, basically. It turns out, and I find those in my massive, lump of text that I've got so far that I've written during 2020. And most of what I've written, thank goodness, is what I call my right brain self speaking. So it's a bit more emotional, it's descriptive, it tends to be chaotic and weird, which is fine as far as, because the funny thing is that I can sort of see how it could be relatable. And I learned quite a lot about expressing myself in that way, that I can actually do it, that it works, funnily enough, to write in that way. Right here on YouTube, on my channel, making my vlogs, making my endless long videos, talking about myself, that's just what got my right brain operating. It's like I got permission, basically, to just go and be a more natural self. The other approach being the left brain, of course, the pseudo-academic, aloof, descriptive kind of a style. And as it turns out, it's probably the same in my videos which is why I don't really do a lot of videos about more, the soul dimension. I refer to that occasionally, basically in the context of some other kind of a process. And I talk about it and explain what I have to explain about my soul dimension experiences when I can't avoid it. Because on this channel, what I want to do is come out as me and just, who cares, I'm just one of you people, basically, who does this thing in this particular way. And there's a gazillion other people who do each thing in their own ways, it's fine. And that's the grace and beauty, I think, of internet and of YouTube, is that you can just put it out there, and it's fine. You're an individual. You listening to this and you're different from me, and hallelujah, So that appeals to me, that the fact that we're all very different and that everybody's got their own approaches and their own preferences and things that they do and things that they don't do and all that's just great for me. So that is definitely for me, in how I read my own material now, it is my right brain life, if you like. It is the life that has become my own in the past 5 years, basically. And here again, I run headlong into this whole narcissism dealio that I apparently inherited, along with everything else. Because up until 5 years ago, what I call my soul retrieval episode, I didn't have this right brain activity, I think, at all. If I had it, it was very passive, it was hidden, it was scared and cowed, and it was hiding in the darkness. This whole personal perspective of mine. And I didn't even have the chance in my own life to, I don't know, man, develop courage enough to come up with new ways. You know, there was no alternative to the cowed victim position in my life on the right brain side of things. All I had what that was active was my left brain side, which is why I couldn't do any proper writing. See, it makes sense. I never managed to do, I had tons of stuff. I have miles of stuff that I still want to talk about. I want to do loads more about astrology, which is fascinating to me, which is where I started basically with my I started off, and that's longer than 5 years ago actually, researching black moon lunar apogee positions for people, for myself and for people in my family and everybody else that I had to figure out how to deal with people. Sometimes that's a problem. When it's not a problem, I don't tend to go and look for that stuff. But I've found and over again that investigating people's lunar apogee position with respect to your own, or with respect to, I'm talking birth charts here, birth horoscopes, with respect to planets and other things going on, that's actually, that it can be a really like a continuous, endless, recurring theme of this is why this person is particularly sensitive, hypersensitive, I would say, to a particular area of life with this person. That's where it all started for me. This black moon, this lunar apogee position in the charts for, by now, dozens of people, I have found to be helpful. That's still a left brain kind of activity, so that's no wonder that I actually started off with that on that path, before my soul retrieval actually happened. By now, as in 2020 and so many years later, I still occasionally go back to that, to the charts, to have a look at those things, and try to also interpret the findings that I know are there, also in charts that I know rather well, like my husband's, for example, or parents, or his parents, or whatever, in new ways. I try to find the patterns, look at the patterns again, like you do with this kind of study. But that's all still rather academic. It's just one of those subjects that I got started on that sort of got me convinced fairly quickly as soon as I found out about that. Okay, so there's, I can explain at least some of the repeating patterns in my own life using the black moon. Use patterns of vulnerability, patterns of pain. I can explain using the black moon. I can use the black moon to explain how it happened, but not why. And the narcissism intel that's coming to me at the moment, that is what I do is I listen to Sam Wagner basically once or maybe twice a week for a couple of hours. So that's all lumped together, because then at some point I just have to pull the plug on that, and that's enough because it just kind of gets to be a bit much. But he's my go-to source for explanations for behaviors that are mainly my parents, and in particular my dad, who used to, have very obvious textbook levels of behaviors in this context, like gaslighting and all that kind of thing. And I've been hesitating whether to put this up here, but I will put this up here because I want to get across why this is such a big deal. I in case you're new here, or maybe you haven't heard me talk about this yet, my parents divorced when I was 6 years old, and after that I had not seen my father for a very long time. I had, as far as I could remember, a fairly pleasant relationship with my dad. as long as I was a toddler. I had never experienced any discomfort or anything unpleasant from him towards me directly. He behaved towards me in a manner that was, as far as I could tell, perfectly friendly. Nowadays, if I think about things and think back through that period, to the extent that I remember anything at all, I think that both my parents were really very busy with their own lives, and that what with starting to move house already immediately after I was born, and all the other things happening to them, there's a lot more that can be said that I have experienced as a toddler, as a 3 and a 4 year old. However, of course, I never had any. It takes a bit of unpacking for me to know that there was a lot more going on than I could interpret at that age, obviously. So from then afterwards, I've lived with my mother for a long time, moved house on and off during my high school years, and so on and so forth, all over Europe. We've had a rather chaotic lifestyle. My mother was an invalid. After her divorce, she never really recuperated from what happened to her, and there's a lot there that I have no clue what it really means, or what were her issues, other than that she had constant belly aches and constant. There's more, there's more intel there as well, and I don't have to bore you with all that, with all the details. The thing is that what I want to do, and that's why this is, a lot of work and it's complicated to talk about. I want to point out to you exactly what happens, I looked up my dad because I knew where he lived in a place not too far from here, about 20 years ago when I moved into this neighborhood. Actually, that's longer, that's 25 years ago or so. So about that period of time, I have visited him. My husband and I visited him and his wife a few times. And again, after a couple of years, another few times or so. But it was never really very easy for any of us to interact. And I just felt like it was just part of the general impossibility of my life, because I had a hard time communicating with people in general. And I spoke 5 languages, but I didn't know how to deal with people, and I certainly didn't know how to deal with vulnerability and with pain, and how to process emotional troubles and things like that. It was just all way over my head. It was massively a mile over my head. It was impossible to deal with, impossible to find, a position, a perspective, words. It was just not so it was really easy to stick me into a particular position in an interaction. And I think that's what I felt back then in those few times that I spoke to my father. He was generally quite friendly, I must say. He gave me a couple of pots of oil paint, pigments and that kind of stuff that he wasn't using anymore, and that he felt like, okay, so it's way better if you can use them. And I was very pleased with that and very grateful. So I had no clue at that point that there was anything more that I needed, to do or think about or figure out at all. And I had no way of doing that. I had no way of figuring anything out anyway. So fast forward, I had a rather freaky soul retrieval experience thanks to a regression video on YouTube that I was watching actually in 2012. And after that, it took me a long while to figure out that there was actually bits there that I needed to do a lot more work on to reconnect with those soul parts, or whatever you want to call those. It was a very interesting, very, very profound experience that has had profound consequences for me, because as I said just earlier, the whole right brain thing just became way more part of my life. It is really hard to explain how you can be alive without being a person. And it is exactly how Sam Vaknin describes the narcissist himself. So, and in most cases, he goes into descriptions about, to the extent that he does that, actually, he describes the relationship of the patient with their mother and how unpredictable their mother was. And there is a level of getting spoiled, and there is a level of fear of pain and fear of abandonment. And none of that really registers all that much with me. There was certainly a level of fear of abandonment between me and my mother, but I don't think that covers it all, never. So the thing is that the part that I found of myself in this whole soul retrieval experience was actually the part that was capable of processing emotional baggage, mostly negative baggage. So processing pain, existing on the other side of pain. And that is the weird thing is, I don't think I could have picked that up from my mother, because she just held on. She never changed either. So why these two people got together and produced me as their offspring, I really have no clue, other than here I am and this is what I have to do now, okay? So I was more or less given the opportunity, I suppose I should say, of talking to my dad again in 2019, last year, actually more or less around this time of year. And more or less accidentally, I didn't really go looking for him at all, because I didn't think it would be much use because of the difference in outlook, and because of the past, basically I was just resigned to the fact that there wasn't really that much going on. And that was the state we were in. And it turned out that there was a reason why I phoned their number. And I was more or less under the impression that his second wife would be living there alone, because that's how she was registered in the phone book on the internet. And so I was more or less curious to know whether, for example, he might have passed away, or he might have moved out of the house, or for whatever reason. And that's basically the reason that I called their number. And I got immediately, she picked up the phone, but she immediately passed me on to her husband, my father. And this is where it gets interesting in terms of narcissism, if this is why you are here. I want to go into what happened exactly at that point, because it is a pristine instance of gaslighting. And I, at the time, was very uncomfortable, but I didn't know it, that's what it was, really. So that is what I have been figuring out in the past year, basically year and a bit. Since then, with a lot of emphasis on things happening after the summer, basically after this year's summer, because it takes me so long and I am so slow in seeing the patterns, but by now I see them and I know what's going on. So here's what happened, okay? I, as you see here, I make videos. I have made a video, I think 2 years ago or so, in the springtime, about Auschwitz, where I mentioned my dad a couple of times and his relatives, his ancestors on mainly his mother's, his father's side. On his father's side, there were Jews, and a lot of those people got carted off to Auschwitz. In the video there, I mentioned a couple of names of people, and I put the names of the people that I had found. To the extent that I found them, it's a very incomplete list, underneath in the description to the video. And I was, I suppose, mourning people and the loss and the just expressing myself, expressing my shock at having found more names than I knew were, had gone. In just a short period before, just before I made the video, I'd found more names on the Yad Vashem Holocaust website and figured out that quite a number of those people were actually related to each other, and so also in the end to my dad and to me. So what happened is that I mention a name in that video of my great-grandmother. So this is my grandfather's mother's name on my dad's side. And the problem that I've had in finding any more ancestors for her. I found lots of ancestors for lots of people, but not hers. And I suppose that's one part of the explanation of what he was trying to do. My dad jumped right in, not having spoken to me for 20 years, as if he had spoken to me only the week before, to say that my interpretation of the name that I had given, Baruch, was wrong, and I needed to realize that this, that, and the other was the case. It's such a pristine example of gaslighting. Why? Because in a normal context, the last time I'd seen my father, right, he didn't have any internet, he didn't have a computer. They were completely out of the loop of those things. They were, I would suppose you would call those old-fashioned people. At that time, there was no indication whatsoever that I would be able to be making videos on this thing called YouTube. It was the Stone Age. It was not 1980, it was a bit afterwards, but it was the Stone Age in terms of the internet and all that. It would have been a lot more normal, and I can sort of see how he would also be meaning at the same time, or at least thinking that he meant for me to be pleased that he had watched my video and all that. But you after 20 years of radio silence, absolute radio silence, and before that, since I was 6 years old, no contact. In that kind of a context, you would imagine that it would be normal for this other person to, if they want to talk about this, to this long lost, girl person who's suddenly in their phone, to start off by saying something like, okay, so I don't know what you're gonna say, or I don't know how you're gonna feel about this, but I watched your video on YouTube. I've seen your videos, a few of them, and I've seen this particular video, and I want to just mention that this or that or the other is the case. And he didn't do that. He never introduced anything, which I think is a theme for both my parents. They always assumed, both of them, and I blame Mercury and Aries because that's what I do. It's easier to blame Mercury and Aries than to blame them personally, because what will that bring me, For the fact that I was just plunged headlong into this whole subject matter. I was, at that point, it was, I think, 6 months after I'd done the famous Auschwitz video. I had no clue. It was the last thing on my mind. So I was catapulted into a position where I had suddenly to be aware of the fact that he was watching me, and that what you're seeing here, he is also seeing. I have no clue whether he is watching at this moment or not. It doesn't matter to me anymore, because I've decided to go radio silent again. After 2 months of it, sort of a similar, unpredictable kind of a treatment, I decided that I couldn't do it anymore. It was just very painful. And this is what gaslighting really is. And I don't think, intelligent as he claims to be, I don't think he really gets the level, except the narcissist, the textbook narcissist, is presented by Sam Vaknin as living on your pain. So I don't really give him the benefit of the doubt anymore in this context at all. I know that that is what he's doing. And I don't know enough about his background to explain for myself why he's doing it, what the causes are and all that. But I know one thing for very sure, which is why I also made a video a short while ago about going completely out and not talking to them anymore, is that if I only think of him, I already get sucked in. There is a level of clever manipulation going on that is what those kinds of people, and I'm going to generalize from here on out, I'm not going to talk about one individual person and my individual experiences with him anymore, but just in general, this is what those people are all about. This is why it's useful to watch Sam Vaknin, because even though it's tough, it's a lot of work and it's exhausting, and I find it very interesting and intriguing often, especially to the extent that I can bring it back to myself again, bring it back to how I behave and the whole hole in my soul that I used to have, which I managed to fix up, to remedy with a soul retrieval experience and all the work that has gone in afterwards. Becoming the human being that I'm supposed to be. And I'm still, it makes me laugh nowadays, but I'm still a bit of a narcissistic kind of a person. I wouldn't be out here on YouTube talking about these things. I also carry a bit of trauma in my own life with me. I didn't do the whole dead inside thing for no reason. Only my explanation for being dead inside, I have found very hard to link up only to this life, because I haven't had that bad experiences as a small child, apart from the fact that both my parents were really shut in on themselves and were really obsessed. Especially my father was obsessed with my mother, and I was kind of feeling shut out. But then again, I got a lot of attention on other fronts in other areas, and my mother was very unhappy with him, and she made a big deal out of that afterwards. And I don't know exactly, I can't be sure exactly how much she became excruciatingly uncomfortable with him towards the latter part of the years that I've experienced with him, those 6 years. It was a nightmare for her. But by then, I'm sure it was also very much a nightmare for him. And he spoke in those conversations that I've had with him over the phone in 2019. He actually spoke about that a few times. And I thought that was really good, for me to hear that side of things also, and to know that my mother was not a saint. She was a difficult person, and she needed what both of them needed at that time. They needed more help than they were getting, and instead of that, they were making more challenges for themselves, which is very much an approach that people had after the Second World War. After the Second World War in the 50s and 60s, people just went into their lives, and especially if they were fairly young at the time, going like, okay, so we have to forget about the past. Everybody was trying to pretend that they were capable of that, you know, forget the past, forget all the misery and all the difficulties, and just get on with it and get new jobs and new opportunities. And I think that for a little while, also after I was born, they that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to have this adventurous, scintillating part of it was jet set kind of a life, you know. And I have memories of being a 4-year-old, you know, more or less, in Geneva, in Switzerland, running around a little park by the lakeside. And it's my own memories of myself, you know, in that life, in that situation there, were pretty nice. And it was nice weather, and there was the big Mont Blanc on the other side of the lake, and the view was magnificent and all that. But somehow or other, they absolutely didn't realize that they had to take care of each other, both of them. I couldn't contribute to any of that. So that's more or less my situation that I had when I was 4 years old, you know, with those people, is that I felt very much that, to the extent that I was aware of anything, I felt that there was a whole big, massive lack of care mutually between those two. And there was something else instead, which was nasty, and that where they were actually frightened of each other, and they made that worse for each other all the time. Sip of tea here. Because I have tea, and it's been sitting there for a bit, so I was looking at it, you know, as I was thinking at the same time. So that's not enough for me to become the same as them. It is like, I hesitate to use the word empath at the moment, because Sam Wagner said something about empaths being covert narcissists. Oh dear. I guess I sort of agree. I mean, I don't mind the term anymore that much. It's just that it feels then, if you say it that way, then it feels like everything is self-serving only, you know? And that makes it less idealistic and altruistic and less presentable for me to think of myself that way. But as I was, you know, at that time, I think I absorbed into myself a whole lot more of the way they behaved and the way they felt, and that was my trauma. That was my nightmare, is that I got bulldozed by both of them being miserable, both of them being in pain, and both of them, I suppose, looking for things in their lives, in each other also, in their marriage, that they didn't get, that they weren't getting, and there was no hope of getting, no way. And you can dream things up, but it doesn't make it any more real, you know? It just doesn't at all. So all that's more or less where I came from. And okay, so I got smacked a few times, and there were a couple of instances that were less than comfortable. There was a lot of moving around. There was a lot of dissociative weirdness going on. I didn't have any brothers and sisters. So yeah, I think that the main factor at that point was that I absorbed all that pain, all that, like a sponge, into my body, even all that desperate searching, and, you know, all the anger and pain and disappointment and all the rest of it from both sides. All that went into me because, or if you like, because my soul connection, the level of connection that you should have with your inner self, really, was for some reason quite weak. And the self connection is what I managed to repair with my soul regression, you know, my regression video experience there. And the part of me that is actually capable of dealing with that, with all this and with everything, was hidden away in a separate area of life that, because of the presentation as a soul retrieval, I interpreted or felt very strongly to be a past life. And it's still very weird to me. It still freaks me out that this is, it is, I also have a huge level of imagination, So as I, for example, am working on my own Rose Oracle cards at the moment, I have decided to make a new set to complement the other cards that I have. I have shown some of those cards last week in a spread that I did. I have a way where I can just sort of attune myself or align myself with the kind of material that I want to use, and the ideas just come blossoming out, and the images are, it's very easy for imagery to, sort of multiply. I don't have to do anything for that. It's more or less, if I just go in exactly that direction, it just starts blooming open. And it's quite possible that what I have experienced was filled in, and the whole of the experience was actually a therapeutic, psychological experience that didn't have anything to do with past lives, is what I'm saying here. It's just the alternative. I've spoken about this before a couple of times, where I am hesitating because you have no way of proving it, unless I were to accidentally or otherwise return to a location that I could convincingly for myself identify as the place where I went for my soul retrieval experience, which was like some kind of a dungeon in an old castle, probably in the mountains in the south of France, but more towards Italy, towards the east, compared to where I used to live back then, when I lived there when I was 17. But it wasn't there that this was happening. It was, I think, I don't know. It's just that the more I try to think about this, the more it gets like being on roller skates on ice. It starts wobbling in all directions, and it just feels I start second guessing myself and wondering whether any of it, it's such a confusing issue. And I don't even necessarily think it's important. It came to me in a presentation as a past life. What I can do is go back on YouTube and look at other regression experiences by other people. There's a few, not that many. And see what that does. See whether I get any, interesting comparisons in how people go through that stuff, and to convince me again, because I'd rather, personally, I prefer the soul retrieval past lives dimension, because then, of course, we have this massive meta-human super consciousness that we are, as we sit here, part of, each one of us, part of your own super self, as it were, with this soul dimension and the history of past lives and incarnations and all the rest of it. So, which is what I really believe in myself, if I have to. I did it with my cat earlier this year. When my cat passed away, I was miserable for a week. I was utterly miserable. And I managed to sort of reconnect the presence of my cat, that I'd, once I'd gotten around to going into this healing mode of person, attitude, focus that you have to have for that kind of thing. And I managed to get him to move on towards the light, which is something I talk about all the time. which has worked. It has worked for me. And so yeah, I don't think I'm going to leave all that. I'm not going to leave the healing and the energy work dimensions behind, just like that. It's just that it is rather a big lot of it is incompatible with the therapeutic psychoanalytical approaches that we're getting given. It's not the same language, but there's interesting information everywhere. That's actually 50 whole minutes. I'm going to stop right here. Thank you so much for hanging on, hanging on for dear life. And I am going to finish my tea. And is there a conclusion here? Yes, I think the conclusion is that I'd rather believe in my energy work because it has seen me through so many difficult episodes, and I don't care whether it's exactly, there's no exact truth in any of these. There's only experience. That's my conclusion. The experience counts. The experience, because that's what you have to work for, and what you have to work with is your own experience, your consciousness, your awareness, what that does, how that goes through things. That's what you have to work with. So yeah, that's a conclusion. Little one. Okay, so you work with that if you want. And I will see you around next time. Okay, thank you. See you then. Bye-bye.